I'm Scott Allen Miller, and on today's Sam IT, we're going to be talking about why you can't find high-quality commercial web hosting no matter how hard you try or where you look. Let's get right to it. Okay, so if you have tried to deal with finding good web hosting for your company, you've probably found that the field is mostly all identical players who are all pushing WordPress and providing a certain lack of information that would be necessary to do really good hosting. There's not enough communications. There's things you need to simply know from your web host about how their caching is working, how they're handling front-end proxies, and so forth. These are things you would need to know, and they would need to know things like what is your optimized version of PHP? What modules do you need? Do you even use PHP? What language do you use? Do you need a language? Are you static hosting? It's bi-directional. Web hosting is not something you can do well in a vacuum, and yet none of those conversations take place with any normal web host. Now, I don't want to say that there are absolutely zero commercial quality web hosts in existence. I'm simply saying I've never encountered one, and it is unlikely that you have either. They are very few and far between, and those that do a good job essentially act like an IT department, because in order to be a good web host, you must act like a good IT department. If you're not engaging your web host either via your IT department who's interfacing with them for you, or you are not interfacing with them like an IT department, then they can't be doing a good job on their end, and they cannot be providing what you need on your end for you to do a good job, because you cannot simply hand web hosting off and do it well to a web host blindly. There's too many moving pieces. The thing that they're hosting is an application, potentially, almost always. And that means that there's a knowledge about the application hosting that needs to be known. Now, if you're hosting simply WordPress, that produces another problem. We will talk in another video about why you almost certainly don't want to be running WordPress, even though it's a great application. But beyond that, there's a lot of things that simply need to be discussed and understood and customized. So why don't companies make good web hosting? Clearly, there's a need for it. Well, the simple answer is there is no need for it. That's a complete myth in the industry. What I found, because I went through this myself. Now, back 25 years ago, I ran my own web host because it was easy to do so in relative to what was available on the market, because simple web hosting simply didn't exist at all. It was not a thing. People hadn't started doing that yet. So in order to have a website online, you had to be your own web host or hire an IT department to do it for you. I was not going to do that, so I did it myself. It wasn't too hard, because in the early days, we didn't have web applications. We only had HTML sitting in text files, and you had to serve them out. That actually made it pretty easy compared to what we do today. So 25 years ago, it was not a big challenge. When PHP and similar applications started rolling around, or application layers started rolling around, web hosting became a lot more complex, and more people needed to do it. Basically, everybody needed to do it, even 20 years ago. So this is not a new thing, but it was a new challenge at the time that everyone suddenly needed this service that was not available. So tons of companies rushed to market to create hosting services that would allow the bulk of companies to get out there and web host. And you have to remember that most IT departments at the time were new to this web thing and were busy, because IT was really complicated back then, simply from a lack of knowledge and experience and how difficult the products were to use. So your IT departments typically were busy, and throwing web hosting at them, something they didn't understand or have exposure to most of the time, was a big challenge. Today, all that has changed. There's so much knowledge about how to do web hosting. Every IT department has to deal with it, because even if you're not doing it for your company's website, you're doing it for countless applications that you run in-house. Essentially, all business applications run just like a website. So you need to understand the databases behind them, the application layers, the web hosting layers, the reverse proxy layers, and all those things, content caching, and so forth. So there's nothing that is specific knowledge to a commercial web host that would be different than what an IT department should know how to do intrinsically already, because it is bread and butter across the industry. There's not that there aren't exceptions, that there's other ways to do things. Of course there are. But it is such a common task, much like hooking up a printer for desktop support. Of course, there's places that don't use printers and never have, but by and large, you're going to want to know how to do that if that's something you work in. So web hosting, very, very common knowledge. So what does that leave us as far as market pressure? Because that's really what determines why there are or are not web hosts that do what we need to do. Simple answer is there's no market pressure for it. Two reasons. One is that the majority of businesses looking for web hosting never talk to an IT department or a qualified IT department that can tell them anything about web hosting. In theory, any company should be able to go to their IT team. Any company should have one, right? They should be able to go to their IT team and say, look, we have this IT need. Is this something you want to do, or do we outsource it? It doesn't matter what the answer is, and both could be correct. The IT team should come back with, sure, we can do it in-house or outsource it. Here's what we need to do. We need to find someone who has this type of technology. They can have, maybe they're going to tell us some technology that we don't know, but we're going to need to provide them a bunch of information, such as, here's how our application runs, here's what's important, here's where it's going to be used, here's how many users it's going to have, here's how to scale it, and so forth. Likewise, that company is going to need to tell us information or have us handle things like the reverse proxy, the forward cache, DNS handling, and so forth. This is stuff that needs to be handled across the board, and we need to coordinate on how the caches are going to be used, what APIs are going to be available, and so forth. You can't do these things effectively blindly. But most companies are not going to their IT department and having that conversation. As someone who works in that space, I can tell you that more than 90% of the time, the owners of a company or the managers of a company will bypass all of the important, key, critical IT knowledge that they have and go directly to a salesperson at an unknown web host and interface with them, ask no questions, provide no information, and purchase a service and move to it without ever engaging the experts that they have hired to do so, to protect them, to have that conversation. So they're bypassing the first piece across the board. There's not very much we can do about that. This is about telling you why there's no market pressure to do a good job, because once you're bypassing your IT, you're not requesting someone who's doing a good job. You can't be. You're going to them with two pieces of information for them. One is that your IT team is not managing your IT. They may think they are. The owner may think they are, but they are not. This is bypassing IT. The owner is effectively becoming shadow IT unless they're already doing all the IT anyway. And they're going to the web host and offering them no information about what they're doing and not engaging them like professionals. They're engaging them as if they could simply provide a box of donuts and no one needs to know what's in it or how to use it. Right? They're treating it like a non-IT product, even though it's simply part of the IT infrastructure. Sure, your website could be seen as something, it's like a marketing thing, and it doesn't tie into other components of your infrastructure, except that's not true, because DNS and other functions like that are tied into the rest of your infrastructure, and you can't do it blindly. It may be loosely tied. You may be able to separate it off with relative ease. You may be able to hand off to someone else without too much of a problem, but it must be handed off. It must be coordinated. It's not what's happening. So any company that you're going to knows instantly by the nature of you going to them and how you interact with them, you don't have an IT team and you're not looking for something that's good, because you would not have ended up in that situation at all if you were putting in the effort to look for something that was good. If you were prioritizing getting a good product, you wouldn't have ended up there. So they know there's no reason for them to do a good job because you're not even considering that as a possibility. The second is that if you have an IT team that knows what they're doing, or more likely management who trusts their IT team who almost certainly does know what they're doing, then you know that it is barely more costly, if even, and less work to create your own high-quality commercial web hosting in-house that does a better job, and you have complete control over it, and it really takes no more IT resources than what it would take to interface with the other company, but you'll have total knowledge of it. This is something that throws people off a lot. Web hosting, so take a normal company situation, and this is where we ended up. I spent a lot of time, this is many years ago, looking at lots of different web hosts. I would work with them, get pricing, we would try hosting with them, and what we found is that their systems were poor, they were hard to use, they were very, very slow in their web hosting, and they had very little technical support. Not saying they couldn't do their job, but they weren't providing anything really special. They also did not have the caching information to do a good job at accelerating the performance of the website itself. They didn't know what version of language platforms to use, so they had to use old ones that were broadly compatible. They didn't know what kind of cache we were looking for, and we didn't know what kind of cache they had because they weren't divulging that critical information. So our IT team could not work with them to do a good job because they weren't willing to talk and share that information. So those caches simply didn't exist to us. That means that the code is unable to auto-flush the cache or auto-update it on changes and so forth. And they didn't provide any information that we would need to have if we didn't have an IT department to know how to handle things like our forward cache and SSL acceleration. Now, we knew how to do those things, so doing that was no problem at all. But you could easily see that if we didn't have an IT department overseeing the process, they were going to happily leave that as a gap and have much lower performance. And lower performance means bad SEO, right? Right from the get-go. So we found we could not find any provider that we felt was doing a good job at all. They were doing a phone-it-in job, just enough to make it work so that someone who doesn't have an IT team evaluating it would answer the question, does your web hosting work? They would say, yes, it does. An IT team would say, no, that doesn't qualify as success. See my video defining success in IT. This would be an IT team evaluating, would say, this is a failure of web hosting. Just because you can make a website come up does not qualify as success. That is a low bar to success that is nonsensical. Anybody can make a website pop up. You can put a file on your desktop that's an HTML file, double click on it, and it'll pop up as a website. It doesn't even require you to install anything or run anything, just double click. Imagine double clicking a notepad file and having a text box show up with some information in it and saying, I can run a website, because that's all you're saying. That's a really low bar. That's not what we're doing. We're trying to do something good here. We're trying to do the right thing for the business. So we were unable to find this. When we looked into, well, what if we did it ourselves? And of course, we have experience in having done that, but we hadn't done it in a while. So we said, well, what if we made our own web host to do this? So we set it up, and what we found was that we were spending about $5. This is for a very small website, which is what the majority of businesses need. $5 to work with a web host that was a commercial web host and doing a terrible job, very slow, all kinds of performance issues, and very little support. If we went to a high-end enterprise cloud platform, Amazon, Vultr, DigitalOcean, and so forth, we were able to run a vastly more performant web host on that platform for about $6. That's 20% more, but we're talking a difference of about $1. But with that, we are getting complete control of our platform. We don't have to worry about resource contention with unknown millions of other users. We're getting a platform we can do anything we want with, including running the most performant applications, knowing how our cache works, prioritizing workloads as we see fit, and so forth. But in many cases, Vultr being a great example, we're able to go in and simply select web hosts from their list of things, and it'll instantly spin up the site for us. It's actually less work to build your own WordPress-based website on Vultr than it is to use any number of normal mainstream web hosts. Less work, not more work. And that's with minimal IT knowledge, right? We're not expecting experts. We're not expecting specialists. We're talking about any reasonably qualified person who's going to handle general IT in a business. Now, if you have a specialized desktop tech who only does desktop support, that's different. But if you have that, you must have someone more general above them or working with them to handle all the other oversight of things. As long as you have anybody qualified to do the IT in your organization, there should be no problem. Even if they've not done it before, there's not a lot of gotchas. It's the kind of thing you can learn as you go without too much of a problem, and nearly all that work is done for you with a few clicks of a button on a million different platforms. There's extremely little cost, and it's very easy. And the amount of technical documentation out there to get you through it, if you haven't done it before, is extreme. And if you can't find that documentation and you don't know what you're doing and you don't know where to start, there are so many communities like Mango Lassi, also known as Republic of IT, or Spiceworks, or similar. We can just go on, ask that question, and in 5 minutes you'll have more answers than you can ever need to respond to. No problem. This is not something someone is struggling to tackle. So doing an expert job will only cost you about $6 a month. Now you say, but I have to pay my IT professional to do this. Yes, that is true. But you need to pay your IT professional to have it work in any way properly with the web host already. And one of the things that we found was that all of the web hosts, because they're catering to this non-technical audience, they put layers of management panels on top of their platform, and those things make it very convoluted, extremely slow to work with, waste all kinds of time, and put you in a bit of danger because there's just a lot more things to patch, and it tends to hold up patching. All of that can go away if you're building your own system. And in doing so, you can actually reduce the total amount of IT team time necessary to set up and get the product up and running. That's the thing that I'm trying to get across, is that there is no upside to the quote unquote commercial hosting in every case that I've seen, because you can do more faster, with less effort, and end up with a better product at the end of the day doing it yourself on an enterprise cloud platform. Now, of course, maybe enterprise cloud is not the answer for you, but if it's not, it rules those products out too. If you need to do something special, of course, then you have to build it yourself. But that's why there's no market pressure for there to be a web host doing a good job, because nobody or almost nobody is demanding that a good job be done. Anyone who is demanding that a good job be done, even if they don't have some customization needs, has access to extremely low-cost hosting, and their IT team can do it without a problem themselves. And so since if you have the capability or just the decision-making capability to know to do it in-house, you know that in-house is essentially unbeatable. And if you're going out of house, they know that you're not looking to do a good job. The combination means there is no sliver in that system where we find someone who's like, well, I really want to do a good job, I'm passionate about it, and yet I haven't done the things necessary to do a good job no matter what, so I'm going to hire someone through this kind of mechanism to replace my IT team. It just isn't a thing. I'm not saying that there's no one out there who's ever come across that one slip, but there's no market pressure, right? There's one or two people in the entire market who may be like, oh, I don't want to have to hire an IT team to do this. I want to hire an IT team for that then maybe they do other things. Weird, but plausible, but it creates no market pressure. Absolutely zero market pressure. There is no money to be made in doing that kind of job. And so because of that, with zero market pressure, it doesn't exist. All of that is just important to understand. If you're going to go out and do web hosting, you cannot go out and find a good web host. And I know you're going to start listing, well, what about this one? No. I guarantee if you list it, this is always the case. I find this to be, if you list it and say, but what about this one? I think they're always going to be the worst possible one. It's never the, oh, that's an edge case we hadn't thought of. It always ends up being, no, that's exactly the company we're talking about, and they qualify for another market pressure that makes them not just bad, but bad within a field of bad things, because there are some good ones. Right? There's some that are much better than others. And the ones you know best are generally the worst ones, because there's more money to be made by being bad. Because there's no market pressure for being good, it actually suggests there's market pressure for being bad. So the big profits are in doing a terrible job. And we'll talk about that in another video, how to run a seemingly commercial web host with no web hosting expertise whatsoever, because it's something that I think people need to understand just how likely it is. And I'm not saying this is 100% because I know some commercial web hosts that have some internal IT and they do try to do a reasonable job, but they still don't make any sense because it makes their costs go way up and they don't provide quite as much as if you did it in-house. But they're way better. They're not trying to do a bad job, but the ones that are making the big money are almost universally putting a real effort into doing nothing, because that's where the money is. And I know a lot of this because I've been hired by companies to do that specifically. Can you oversee the creation of a business with no staff or expertise? None. And so customers will come to you thinking you're the experts, and you're expecting your customers to know more than you because you have no support, no staff whatsoever. And I've seen similar in other fields. This is not unique to web hosting. We see that in phones, for example. There's a lot of phone companies out there that are simply reselling someone else's products. They themselves have no expertise whatsoever. When you call them for support, they have no idea even what you're talking about. They don't even know how to plug in the phones or make them work themselves. They have to use someone to support their own phones. And I know this is true with web hosting because I got my start in the MSP space when almost 20 years ago, my company was hired by a large 60-person web hosting company in Toronto to set up their own internal website because they had never built a web host before and had no idea what went into building and running a website. And yet they had huge staff and hundreds of customers that they did this for every day. They were simply reselling things that didn't work very well. They only knew that they didn't work very well. So for their own website, they knew not to use themselves. They wouldn't eat their own dog food. So we were hired to provide the web hosting skills that the web hosting company didn't have internally. And the stuff they were asking for is stuff I would expect a junior systems admin straight into their very first job to be able to do more or less in their sleep. I'm not saying that they would get nothing wrong or be perfect at it, but the stuff that they were looking for was certainly day one of a systems administrator position kind of labor. They had nobody who qualified for that. And that really tipped us off to what this market was like or could be like. And over the years, I've done a lot of research on it and followed up and just really looked at why it works this way. And it has to, because of the way the companies interact with them and because of how easy it is how incredibly simple it is to do a good job without engaging a third party. Those third parties will never end up making sense because profits drive how companies behave, right? As long as their consumers are not pushing them to do a good job, are not providing profits when they do a good job, are rewarding them when they do a bad job. And if you're wondering, the way that they're rewarded for doing a bad job is that the less work they put in, the less expertise that they provide, the less good job, the less fast that the website is, the easier it is for them to either lower their cost or increase their margins. And in both cases, that provides the ability to go out, get more customers, and have a bigger marketing budget to go get more customers. So the nature of doing a bad job is that it makes it easier for you to get in front of more customers and convince them to come let you do a bad job for them. Because fundamentally, nobody evaluates good or bad job as long as it runs. Once in a while they do, and then they realize that going with commercial hosting is not the answer, and they can solve a lot of their problems simply by moving off of that. And then they discover there's no additional cost for doing so, and that they did so under a myth. So, because of all that, I recommend rethinking how you approach everything you do, web hosting included, when you're going to do something that is in any way technical. And if you're wondering if it's technical, always include your IT oversight, because any qualified IT could tell you this immediately. This would not be a long conversation. You would not have to watch the length of this video. You would simply be able to say, I have an IT advisor. Hey, I need to host a website. What should I stop? We just spin it up. It's just a thing we do. We don't need to discuss it. Management doesn't need to know how we're doing it. It's a line item of $6 a month for the best systems out there. And if you're a big company who has big needs for your web hosting, then yeah, it's going to be more expensive, but it's always going to be cheaper doing it in-house, whether it's your full-time staff or your ITSP that outsources your staff. It doesn't matter. That's all in-house in this sense. And it's also important to note, and we'll talk about this in a different video, if your team was doing brochure sites, which is about 90 to 95% of all companies should have brochure sites as their website. For those, there is no application layer. That should be a static site. That is the easiest thing to host, and it is free 100% of the time for companies doing that. So when we're looking at all of this, we're talking about only the 5% of businesses that need to actually have a dynamic host. Everybody else, there's free hosting out there for you that is good. It may not be the absolute best, but it's really good and it's free, and there's a lot of it. It's not like just one player and you have to know about them. As long as you're doing proper websites, which are static for the majority of businesses, and I'm not telling you which businesses that's appropriate for and which they aren't. We'll talk about that in another video. But for the vast majority of businesses, all of this is moot. It is a free thing, and that's why you go to your IT first before you get a slow website with lots of problems by a third party and everybody involved in that system knows that you're doing these things, and so they will constantly try to find hooks to make you addicted to what they do. They will make your website more complicated than it needs to be, so you have to hire another person, so you have to hire another person, so you have to hire another person, and pretty soon you have a large budget and spending thousands of dollars for something that you could have had made soup to nuts for a few $100s and hosted for free. Thanks for joining me. Please remember to like and subscribe. Questions, comments, put them below. If you'd like to sponsor this channel, it would be much appreciated. You can buy me a coffee, and that comes directly to me. If you're looking for IT support and need help with anything, whether it's just something on your desktop that you're not sure how to handle, you need printer support, or you need a CIO like myself to sit down with your owners or your CEO and look at the strategies for your company or anything in between. My company is ntg.co. That is what we've been doing for nearly a quarter of a century. That is our bread and butter. We would love to work with you as well. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you all next time. Hey everyone, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and for all of you who have been supporting this channel over the many years that we have been here. I'm working really hard to get this channel back on track and get videos coming out on a regular basis. And part of that is something we've never done before, and that is give you guys a way to support the channel. It would be amazing if you wanted to do that, whether it's something as simple as giving it a like, a subscribe, and sharing with your friends, telling your coworkers or your boss or your company about it. All of that would be fantastic. For those who want to do a little bit more, you can buy me a coffee. Down in the links below, I have a link where you can go and support me directly. Any coffees that you buy is money that comes directly to me, so that's a great way to support the channel directly. You can also buy my book. Not all of you are aware, but I recently wrote Linux Administration Best Practices, and that is available on Amazon. That link will be below as well. That would mean a lot to me if you guys went out and purchased that. That really does help quite a bit. And for those who are looking for more than this channel does, as a YouTube channel. I am a consulting CIO, and those that are interested can go to ntg.co. And that is where I've been for the last 23 years as a researcher, as an engineer, as a consulting information technology and operations director for companies of all types and sizes all around the world. Whether you need just a little bit of consulting, you need some advice on a project, or you're looking for someone to actually oversee all the operations of your company from a business infrastructure perspective, we offer all of that. Please reach out, sales@ntg.co. We would love to speak to you about what we can offer. Thanks so much for watching the show. I will see all of you next time.